Okay, Peter. So middle of January, we're still enduring our hiatus from boxing imposed by the British Boxing Board of Control to cope with COVID. But the good news, I suppose, at this stage is that it looks like that hiatus will be over in February and we'll be kind of back to normal and back to shows. But today, I just want to talk about an interesting thing that popped up at the middle of last week. Ben Davison was talking to Steve Bunce on Radio 5 Live, and Ben Davison commented that he thought other UK trainers were lazy. The reason for his success was that he outworked them. I just thought it was obviously quite an acerbic comment to make. And I just wanted to look at a bit into it, really. Look at a bit of, whether it's true and, why he said it and all that sort of thing. So I suppose the first thing we need to do, for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure most people do, but, who Ben Davison is. So Ben Davison is only 30 years old and he's a very high profile trainer. He, his background, he briefly dabbled in amateur boxing and, but not to a great deal. He was a very successful, talented footballer. I think he played for Stevenage Town. He as a young lad, so not really a big boxing background. And then he started kind of when he was about 22, 23, hawking his services around to boxers as a nutritionist, a strength and conditioning coach, which incidentally are the coaches that a lot of old school coaches don't like around fighters. But he did have a connection with Billy Joe Saunders, and in 2016 he worked his first title fight in the corner for Billy Joe Saunders, from there he was introduced to Tyson Fury, and that was when he really kind of broke through. I mean, Tyson Fury at that point, he was down at MTK, gone down to train at MTK in Marbella with Billy Joe. He was 10 stone overweight, looked terrible, but had decided that he wanted to come back after all his troubles, and he hooked up with Ben Davison. He met Ben Davison, just really got on with him, hit it off, said, right, you can be my trainer. And Ben Davison did oversee a 10 stone weight loss for Tyson Fury, and then obviously he came back, in that first sort of comeback fight. So he was with Tyson from 2017 to 2019. Culminating in that, we're going through to that, the December 2018 fight, the miraculous resurrection fight, as we call it, with Deontay Wilder. So, he was very successful with Fury, and this really brought him to a lot of people's mind. So, and now he's training Josh Taylor. He's got Pat and Luke McCormack, the McCormack twins, who just turned over after a very successful, including the Olympics amateur career. He's got Lee Wood, and he's also co-training with Devon Haney. So some really high-profile top fighters there. And like I said, the guy is only 30 years old. So why are people criticising him, and why has he responded to that criticism, with this quite stinging rebuke? I think the easy answer to that is he's young and successful, and that tends to bring in a lot of criticism with it. So, he hasn't had a loss since 2016, as he says, and he's working with these absolutely top level fighters. The criticism leveled against him is that, he's working with successful fighters. If that sounds like a bit of a backwards criticism, you're trying to say that the people are trying to say, look, if you train Tyson Fury, and if you train Josh Taylor, you're going to win. These guys are so super talented that really, it was a famous criticism Adam Booth once levelled at Enzo Calzaghe, when Enzo said, he said, look, Adam Booth was training Enzo Maccarinelli, and obviously he was fighting David Haye, and it was a bit of a clash of the trainers, as sometimes happens in these fights. And Enzo Maccarinelli said, how can you criticise my training methods? How can you criticise? Because Enzo was very old school, and Adam Booth was very kind of new school. And Enzo said, how can you criticise my training methods? Look at what I've done with Joe Calzaghe, my son, taking him all the way through the amateurs up to pro. And Adam's response was, look, Mr. Bean could have trained Joe Calzaghe. He's so talented. He would have been world champion, whoever trained him. Very, very harsh, but obviously that was in the confines of the fight. And the criticism against Ben Davison is that he hasn't taken anyone, which is kind of the metric, or the ultimate sort of testimony to a trainer's ability, is to take a fighter all the way from the amateurs, or at least from when they just turn pro, and take them all the way up to world level. As we've seen, like Virgil Hunter do, as we've seen, Eddie Reneso do, as we've seen these trainers take these guys all the way from the amateurs, all the way through to top world champion as a pro, and that is the ultimate sort of testimony. Now, interestingly enough, obviously the thing is, Ben Davison's kind of too young to have done that in a way, but he has got, there's McCormack twins now, Pat and Luke McCormack. All right, they've got incredible potential as amateurs, but if he can in 5 years' time take them all the way through to be top pros, then that will kind of underline his training credentials. And I think that's one of the reasons people criticise him. I mean, interestingly enough, another reason people criticise him is because he hasn't got a big boxing background. As I've alluded to, he apparently dabbled in amateur boxing, but was predominantly a footballer, and then came in as a nutritionist and S&C coach. But this is not uncommon in boxing. And it's interesting that often, even fans are criticised if they said, look, if you haven't boxed, you can't criticise this performance. But if we look at, trainers that famous trainers that haven't boxed, I mean, interestingly enough, one of the most deified trainers of all, Customato, who famously took Floyd Patterson and then Mike Tyson, to the top of the heavyweight tree. He never boxed. Ray Arcel, who coached, two of the greatest lightweights of all time, Benny Leonard and Roberto Duran, he never boxed. Angelo Dundee, we can talk about Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard is two main, but Dundee coached loads of world champions, never boxed. And as I've also mentioned, Denzel Calzaghe, who took obviously his son Joe all the way from the amateurs through to the top of the pro tree, and other world champions like Enzo Maccarelli and Gavin Rees never boxed. So I don't think that really, holds a lot of water, that, although, there are lots of, the young crop of trainers around at the moment who Ben Davison's competing with. And I don't think he's referring to the top guys here when he says they're all lazy. But I mean, if you look at Adam Booth, Adam Booth boxed as an amateur at the Fitzroy Lodge with David Hay and then took David Hay all the way through. Tony Simpson at Matchroom boxed as an amateur. Rob McCracken was very successful as a pro. And obviously Rob has that great in that he coaches the UK amateur team. So he's based up there in Sheffield. And then, obviously people like Anthony Joshua come through and stick with him. You've got Mark Tibbs out there as well. Mark Tibbs has worked with Ben Davison. Notably, Mark Tibbs was coaching Billy Joe Saunders. And then when Billy Joe split with Mark Tibbs, he went with Ben Davison, and then he went and looked at Dominic Ingle and a few other coaches, and then came back to Mark Tibbs for the big Canelo fight. But Davison was also in the corner, where he showed a very clear head when that terrible injury came about to Billy Joe. Davison, the one that said he can't carry on, whereas Mark was a little bit, unsure about whether he could. Obviously, Jamie Moore was in that mix as well. So, some really great fights. A lot of people are knocking at Ben Davison's door at the moment because he's seeing the success. Like he said, he hasn't had a loss since 2016. But also, when you've been around a bit longer, you see this, you see this in boxing. If we go back to, I remember when Ricky Hatton was coming through, and everybody was knocking at Billy Graham's door when Ricky Hatton was doing so well, and everybody was doing the body belt because Billy used to have this, almost like his trick was this huge belt he used to have. It was almost like a mattress. He would put it on, and Ricky would wail away at that for 15 rounds, being sick in the bucket, and that, and he knew he was ready for a fight. And everybody went to Billy Graham when Ricky was flying high. And then shortly after that with Joe Calzaghe, like I say, everybody was knocking at Enzo's door. When David Hay was flying high, everybody was looking at Adam Booth's door. And lots of people went to Shane McGuigan after Carl Frampton's success. So, success does breed success. And at the moment, Ben Davison is on such a good run that inevitably lots of people are knocking at his door. But, as to his criticism of other trainers being lazy, I mean, let's look at what he actually meant by that. What he actually meant by it, really, I think, was he was saying that people are stuck in their ways. He defines it as coachability. That's what he looks for in his fighters. He looks for fighters who are, on the one hand, ready to accept new training methods, to come to him, listen and do new things and not say, look, I've done that. And also he talked a lot about going over the basics. So guys who aren't going to say, look, I've already done that. I've got an Olympic medal. I've got a world championship. I'm not going to do that stuff. I want to do it my way. So he looks at that coachability, and he also defines himself as a coachable coach. So as somebody who is always going away, looking at where he went wrong, looking at what he did right, looking at how he can improve. And obviously as a young man, relatively new in the sport, even though he's flying so high, he's really got to do that and got to develop. So, a big sort of career ahead for him. But, his criticism was directly that the UK trainers are lazy and he outworks them all. So I think that's maybe born from a little bit of the criticism that he gets for being so young and successful. And I think, he's flying so high and he's doing so well. And interestingly enough, there's going to be a clash of trainers coming up because, as I said, he's training Lee Wood, and Lee Wood showed massive improvements when he won that world title against Kanzu when he was a big underdog and had dominated the fight. And his next defence, or his first defence, is going to be shortly coming up against Michael Conlan, who's trained by Adam Booth. So he's a little bit longer in the tooth. Adam Booth's about 50. Like I say, these trainers I've mentioned are a real sort of great crop of young trainers. But it's going to be interesting to see how that clash plays out. And it's also going to be interesting to see because Ben's on such a great run, inevitably there are going to things, Lee Wood could lose against Michael Conlan. I don't think Josh Taylor's going to lose against Jack Catterall, but I think it's going to be a harder fight than people say. So, the losses are going to come inevitably in this game. And how's he going to react to them, and how are other people going to react to them? Because like I say, sometimes people, when their star fighter goes down, the star can wane a bit. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a great ride. I think Ben Davison has got a great future. He's going to get this criticism. He's going to get these knocks. And, it'll be interesting to see how he deals with it, how he develops, because he is so young. He's only 30. and he's right at the top of the tree. So in a way, you could say the only way is down. But he's got to kind of hang in there, and he's going to take some knocks, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops with them. But great talent, and like I said, there's a great field of UK trainers out there, of young UK trainers out there, which I think is really going to raise our game even more in the coming years. So exciting times. I don't know whether the criticism was justified. I suppose we'll have to sit back and look and see how it all plays out. But yeah, interesting to talk about the trainers for once, Peter, instead of the fighters. But soon we'll be back talking about the fighters when the UK boxing scene starts up again on the 1st of February. Thanks a lot.